The moment the ring slipped into the champagne glass, Eliza knew something was wrong. It wasn't a new ring, it was hers, the one that had adorned her finger for 7 years. As the platinum band sank through the bubbles, her husband's words cut deeper than any knife on their anniversary table could. "I want a divorce." 3 words. 17 letters. One shattered life. The upscale restaurant continued its symphony of clinking glasses and polite laughter around them, oblivious to the collapse happening at table 19. Eliza's fingers trembled as she fished the ring from her drink, champagne dripping onto the white tablecloth, a small stain spreading, not unlike the hollowness expanding in her chest. Marcus didn't look at her when he said it. His eyes, once warm amber pools she'd happily drown in, fixed on some invisible point beyond her shoulder. She searched his face for any trace of the man who'd promised forever, finding only the hardened shell of someone she no longer recognized. "Is there someone else?" Her voice remained steady, surprising even herself. His silence answered before his reluctant nod confirmed it. "Vanessa, from work. It just happened. Just happened. As if 7 years of marriage could be dismantled by accident, like knocking over a vase. Eliza didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't create the scene a small, vindictive part of her wanted to. Instead, she placed the wet ring beside his barely touched salmon, stood up, and smoothed down her carefully chosen anniversary dress. The one he'd once said made her eyes look like the Mediterranean Sea. "I'll be gone by morning." And she was. That night, as Marcus slept in their guest room, Eliza packed essentials with mechanical precision. Photo albums remained untouched. The wedding quilt stayed folded at the foot of their bed. She took only what couldn't be replaced: her grandmother's locket, her journals, her dignity. When dawn broke, she left her keys on the kitchen counter next to a note with her lawyer's contact information. No tearful goodbye. No desperate plea. Just the quiet click of the door closing on what she'd thought would be forever. 6 months passed in a blur of reinvention. Eliza moved into a small apartment downtown, the kind with exposed brick walls and windows that caught the morning sun. She dyed her honey blonde hair a rich auburn, not to hide but to mark transformation. The corporate job she'd tolerated for Marcus's career aspirations gave way to a position at a boutique marketing agency where her creativity flourished. She made new friends, learned to enjoy meals alone, discovered the peculiar freedom of answering to no one but herself. The divorce proceedings moved forward with cold efficiency, assets divided through mediators rather than direct confrontation. Eliza requested nothing beyond what was legally hers. No alimony, no claim on the house they'd renovated together. She wanted clean borders around her new life, unsullied by bitter negotiations. On a crisp autumn Thursday, exactly 6 months and 3 days after anniversary champagne had washed over her wedding ring, Eliza's phone lit up with a name she'd deleted but couldn't forget. Marcus. She let it ring through to voicemail, continued painting her living room wall the deep teal she'd always wanted but he'd called too intense. When the second call came 5 minutes later, she silenced it again. By the third, curiosity overcame resolution. "Hello, Marcus." The line crackled with heavy breathing. Liz. Only he had ever called her that. "Can we talk?" "We're talking now." "In person. Please." Something in his voice, a fragility she'd never heard before, gave her pause. "Why?" "I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life." Part of her wanted to hang up, to deny him even the satisfaction of explanation. But another part, the part that had once loved this man enough to promise forever, needed closure. "The coffee shop on Highland. Tomorrow at 2. 30 minutes, no more." She arrived 5 minutes late deliberately, a small assertion of power. Marcus looked terrible. His usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated. Hair too long, shirt wrinkled, dark circles shadowing his eyes. Something like satisfaction flickered in her chest before compassion tamped it down. "Thank you for coming," he said as she slid into the chair across from him, maintaining careful distance. 30 minutes, Marcus. I have plans later." A small lie, but a necessary boundary. He nodded, fingers nervously shredding a napkin. Vanessa left 3 weeks ago. Eliza kept her expression neutral, though inside a cascade of emotions threatened to break her composure. I'm sorry to hear that. No, you're not. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You shouldn't be. What happened? Marcus looked down at the destruction he'd made of the napkin. She was using me. For connections, for access to client accounts, she was transferring funds, small amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts. When I discovered it and confronted her, she was gone the next day, along with nearly $80,000 from the firm. The revelation should have satisfied some vengeful part of Eliza's soul, but instead it just made her tired. That's terrible, Marcus. Have you reported it? Yes, the investigation is ongoing. He hesitated, then reached across the table. Eliza moved her hands to her lap. His remained abandoned in no man's land. But that's not why I wanted to see you. Then why? I miss you. Every day. Every minute. I made an unforgivable mistake. Threw away everything good and real for something that was a lie from the start. Eliza studied his face. The familiar constellation of freckles across his nose, the small scar on his chin from a childhood bicycle accident, the amber eyes now swimming with unshed tears. Once, she'd traced these features in the darkness, memorizing him by touch. Now, they belonged to a stranger wearing her husband's face. What do you want from me, Marcus? A second chance. His voice broke. To come home. For a brief, dizzying moment, Eliza imagined it, returning to their craftsman bungalow with its wraparound porch and climbing roses, sleeping in their king-sized bed, Sunday farmers markets and Thursday night takeout traditions, the comfortable rhythm of a shared life. But then she remembered the night she'd stood alone in their bedroom, listening to him snore in the guest room while she packed her existence into 3 suitcases. Remembered how easily 7 years had been discarded for novelty. Remembered the woman she'd become in the aftermath. There is no home to go back to, she said softly. You burned it down. Marcus's face crumpled. I know I hurt you. No, Eliza interrupted, suddenly finding the voice that had abandoned her that night in the restaurant. You didn't just hurt me. You betrayed me. You dismantled our life together without even giving me the chance to fight for it. You made a choice, Marcus. And now I'm making mine. Please, he whispered. I love you. I never stopped. Love doesn't announce divorce over anniversary champagne, she replied, surprised by how steady her voice remained. Love doesn't pack its bags while you're sleeping. Love fights. You didn't. And now I am fighting. For us. There is no us. Not anymore. She glanced at her watch. Your 30 minutes are almost up. Desperation edged into his voice. What can I do? Tell me what to do to fix this. For the first time since sitting down, Eliza truly looked at him. Not the husband she'd lost or the stranger who'd replaced him, but simply a man who'd made a catastrophic choice and was drowning in its consequences. You can't fix this, Marcus. Some things, once broken, stay broken. But you can learn from it. You can become someone who doesn't discard people when something shinier comes along. You can honor what we had by growing from its end. She stood, gathering her purse. Marcus reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away immediately. I will always love the man I married, she said gently. But he doesn't exist anymore. Neither does the woman you left. We're different people now. Liz, goodbye, Marcus. As she walked away, she felt the weight of his gaze boring into her back. The old Eliza might have turned around, might have succumbed to the familiar gravity between them. But the woman who stepped out of that coffee shop kept her eyes forward, focused on the life she was building rather than the one she'd lost. That evening, as sunset painted her apartment in amber and gold, Eliza opened the box she'd kept locked in her closet. Inside lay the physical remnants of her marriage, the platinum ring, their wedding album, the dried boutonniere from their first anniversary. She'd been unable to either look at them or discard them, caught in limbo like the rest of her heart. Her phone chimed with a text from Marcus. I'll wait, for as long as it takes. Sighing, she set the phone aside and lifted the wedding album from the box. The smiling strangers in white and black stared back at her, so young, so certain of their forever. She traced their paper faces one last time before closing the album and returning it to the box. Not to hide away again, but to donate, to release. It was time to stop living in the space between what was and what could be. Time to fully inhabit her present. She typed a response to Marcus. "Don't wait for me. I'm not coming back. Find your happiness elsewhere, as I have found mine." After sending the message, she blocked his number. That night, for the first time in 6 months, Eliza slept without dreaming of what she'd lost. Instead, her dreams were filled with teal walls, morning sunlight, and the sweet anticipation of a future entirely her own. The next morning, Eliza woke to knocking. Persistent, desperate knocking that pulled her from sleep and into immediate alertness. Checking her phone, 6:17 a.m., she wrapped herself in a robe and approached her apartment door cautiously. Through the peephole, Marcus's distorted face stared back. Her heart hammered against her ribs. How did he know where she lived? She'd been careful, telling only her closest friends about her new address. Then she remembered. Her forwarded mail. He must have seen the change of address form. "I know you're in there, Liz. Please, just talk to me." She leaned against the door, pressing her forehead to the cool wood. "Go away, Marcus. I said everything I needed to say yesterday. You blocked my number." That should have been your first clue. His palm flattened against the door, so close to where her own hand rested that she could almost feel the heat of him through the barrier. "I can't just let you go." "You already did. 6 months ago." Her voice hardened. "This isn't love, Marcus. It's possession. It's ego. You didn't want me until you couldn't have me." "That's not true." A door opened down the hall. Eliza winced, imagining her neighbors witnessing this scene. "You're making a scene. Please leave before I call security." Silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Then his voice dropped to a near whisper. "I found your journal, the one you kept in your nightstand." Ice flooded her veins. That journal contained her most private thoughts, her doubts about their marriage in those final months, her suspicions about his late nights at the office, her deepest insecurities. "You had no right," she hissed through the door. "I know, but I read it all, Liz. I know you sensed, Asya, something was wrong long before I said anything. I know you were trying to fix us while I was already checking out." Anger flared, hot and cleansing. Eliza yanked the door open, keeping the security chain engaged. Through the narrow gap, she met his bloodshot eyes. "And that makes it better? That you read my private thoughts without permission? That you knew I was fighting for us while you were sleeping with someone else? Get out, Marcus. Now." His face crumpled. "Please." "Ms. Carter, everything okay?" The voice belonged to the building's security guard, Ramon, making his morning rounds. Relief washed through her. "This man was just leaving, Ramon. He's not welcome here." Marcus's eyes darted between her and the uniformed guard. "This isn't over, Liz." "Yes, it is." She closed the door firmly and listened as Ramon escorted her ex-husband from the building. Her hands shook as she made coffee, spilling grounds across the counter. The violation of her journal, the one place she'd been truly honest during those painful final months, felt like a second betrayal. Marcus had taken not only her future, but was now trying to rewrite their past. By the time she arrived at work, Eliza had made 3 decisions: change the locks on her apartment, file a restraining order if necessary, and stop letting Marcus hijack her hard-won peace. Her colleague Jade noticed her distraction immediately. "Rough morning? You've been staring at the same email for 10 minutes. Eliza managed a weak smile. "Ex-husband drama. Nothing I can't handle." "The one who dropped you for the corporate criminal? Tell me you didn't take him back." "God, no, but he's not taking no for an answer." Jade's expression darkened. "Men. They want what they can't have, then don't want what they've got." She perched on the edge of Eliza's desk. "Speaking of men, though, that new client from the sports apparel company has been asking about you. The one with the cheekbones?" Despite everything, Eliza felt a flicker of interest. She'd noticed Jamie during the pitch meeting. Tall, thoughtful, with a quiet intensity when he spoke about his company's vision. He'd asked intelligent questions and actually listened to her answers, a refreshing change from the mansplaining she often encountered. He's just being professional. Professional men don't ask if you're single while reviewing marketing strategies, Jade countered with a knowing smirk. He didn't. Oh, but he did. Very smoothly, too. Worked it right into a conversation about target demographics. She winked. Staff meeting in 10. He'll be there. For the first time that day, Eliza's thoughts lifted away from Marcus and his intrusion. The possibility of something new, something uncomplicated by shared history and betrayal, felt like oxygen after too long underwater. The meeting went well. Jamie caught her eye several times, his smile genuine whenever she made a point. Afterward, he lingered by her desk, ostensibly to discuss campaign specifics. Would you be interested in continuing this over coffee? He asked finally. Professionally, of course, but maybe outside office hours? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I'm not giving up on us, M. Jamie noticed her expression change. Everything okay? Ex-husband, she explained, setting the phone face down. He's having trouble with boundaries. Understanding dawned in Jamie's eyes. Recent? Divorce finalized last month, but we've been separated for 6 months. He nodded, weighing his next words carefully. I've been there. Well, not exactly there. I was the one left behind when my ex-wife decided she wanted different things. Took me a long time to find my footing again. The casual revelation of shared experience created an instant connection, a recognition of similar wounds. About that coffee, Eliza said, surprising herself with her boldness. I'd like that, but I should be upfront. I'm still figuring out what moving forward looks like. Jamie's smile returned, warming his eyes. No pressure, just coffee and conversation. I'm pretty good at both. As they exchanged numbers, properly this time, for their coffee date, Eliza felt something unfurl in her chest. Not love? Not yet. But possibility. And after months of endings, a beginning felt revolutionary. That evening, as she walked to her car in the agency's parking garage, a figure stepped from between 2 vehicles. Eliza's keys immediately positioned between her fingers in a defensive grip. But as the figure moved into the fluorescent light, her fear transformed into anger. Are you stalking me now, Marcus? He looked worse than he had that morning, if possible, as though he hadn't slept or changed clothes. I needed to see you. You're not answering my messages. Because I blocked you. Because I've moved on. She kept her distance, scanning for security cameras or other people in the quiet garage. This stops now or I'm getting a restraining order. You're seeing someone, he accused, his voice hollow. I saw you with him, in your office. Ice slid down her spine. You followed me to work? I had to know why you wouldn't give us another chance. There is no us, Marcus. You made sure of that when you cheated on me and asked for a divorce on our anniversary. Anger fueled her courage as she stepped closer, pointing a finger at his chest. You don't get to destroy someone and then demand they reassemble themselves for your convenience. His face contorted. He won't love you like I do. Your version of love nearly broke me. I'll take my chances elsewhere. She stepped around him toward her car. Don't contact me again. Don't come to my home. Don't come to my workplace. If you do, I'll file for a protective order. As she unlocked her car, Marcus called after her. He'll hurt you too, Liz. Everyone leaves eventually. She paused, one foot in the vehicle, and looked back at the shell of the man she'd once built her life around. No, Marcus. Not everyone. Some people stay. Some people fight for what matters. You just weren't one of them. The drive home brought no relief. Every red light had her checking her rearview mirror for Marcus's sedan. By the time she reached her apartment, her nerves were frayed raw, her hands trembling as she fumbled with her keys. Inside, she deadbolted the door and sank onto her couch, exhaustion coating her like lead. This wasn't the clean break she'd envisioned. Marcus was unraveling, his desperation escalating in ways that left her genuinely afraid. not just for her safety, but for the fragile new life she'd constructed. Her phone chimed with a text from Jamie. "Looking forward to coffee tomorrow. Hope your evening improved after work." Before she could respond, another message appeared, a photo from an unknown number. Her stomach dropped as she opened it, a picture of her and Marcus on their wedding day, his handwritten note visible at the bottom. "Remember when forever meant something?" With shaking fingers, she took screenshots of everything, then called the non-emergency police line to report harassment. The officer who took her information sounded sympathetic but not overly concerned. "Unfortunately, ma'am, text messages aren't typically enough for a restraining order unless they contain explicit threats. But document everything and call us immediately if he appears at your home again." After hanging up, she texted Jamie to reschedule their coffee, explaining vaguely about personal matters. His response was immediate and understanding, suggesting they move their date to a more secure location, the cafe inside her office building, rather than cancel. His consideration touched her deeply. Without thinking, she called him. "I'm sorry about this," she said when he answered. "My ex-husband is not handling things well." "Are you safe?" The genuine concern in his voice wrapped around her like a blanket. "I think so. Just rattled." She hesitated. "I filed a police report, but they said there's not much they can do yet." "Do you want company?" "Not... I don't mean that how it sounds. Just... sometimes it helps not to be alone when you're scared." The offer was tempting, but introducing a new man into this volatile situation seemed like pouring gasoline on a fire. "I appreciate that more than I can say, but I think I need to handle this myself. Rain check?" "Of course. And Eliza, don't hesitate to call if you need anything. Anytime." After they hung up, Eliza made herself a cup of tea and tried to settle her nerves. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too isolated. She double-checked every window lock, drew all the blinds, and wedged a chair under her doorknob for good measure. Sleep eluded her. Every creak in the old building sent her heart racing. Around 2 a.m., a sharp knock at her door catapulted her from bed. She stood frozen in her bedroom, straining to hear. "Liz!" Marcus's voice, slurred and desperate. "Liz, I know you're in there." She didn't respond, silently dialing 911 on her phone. "I just want to talk," he continued, his voice breaking. "Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The 911 operator answered, and Eliza whispered her situation, giving her address and explaining that her ex-husband was at her door, possibly intoxicated. "Officers are on their way, ma'am," the dispatcher assured her. "Stay on the line with me." Outside, Marcus's pleading gave way to anger. "I gave you everything. 7 years of my life, and you throw it away for some stranger who doesn't even know you." "Ma'am, is he trying to enter the dwelling?" the dispatcher asked. As if on cue, the doorknob rattled violently. "Open the door, Liz. I know he's in there with you." "He's trying to get in," Eliza whispered, terror clawing at her throat. "Please hurry." 3 agonizing minutes later, she heard the blessed sound of authoritative voices in the hallway. Marcus's protests were met with firm commands to step back, to calm down, to put his hands where they could see them. Only when she heard the officers identify themselves did she approach her door, still clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Ma'am? Police, are you all right?" She removed the chair and opened the door to find 2 officers flanking a handcuffed Marcus, whose face was a mask of drunken bewilderment. "Tell them this is a mistake, Liz," he slurred. "Tell them I'm your husband." "Ex-husband," she corrected, her voice stronger than she felt. "And I want to press charges for harassment and attempted breaking and entering." The next hours passed in a blur of statements and paperwork. Marcus was taken to the station to sober up in a holding cell. Eliza was granted an emergency protective order that would keep him at least 500 feet from her home and workplace for the next 2 weeks, pending a court hearing for a more permanent solution. By the time dawn broke, she was emotionally drained but resolute. She called her boss to request a personal day, then contacted her lawyer to discuss options for ensuring her long-term safety. Just before noon, as she was finally drifting off to sleep, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but after the night she'd had, she answered cautiously. "Miss Carter? This is Officer Reyes from last night." The policeman's voice was professionally detached. "I wanted to let you know your ex-husband has been released on bail, but the protective order has been served. He's aware of the restrictions." "Thank you," she managed, anxiety immediately spiking again. "There's something else," the officer continued, his tone softening slightly. "He surrendered his house keys voluntarily, said they were to your former shared residence where you never changed the locks. He seemed more coherent this morning, remorseful. Mentioned something about reading your words and finally understanding. Her journal, the one he'd stolen and read. I see, she said, unsure how to respond. Just thought you should know. Take care, ma'am." After hanging up, Eliza stared at her ceiling, processing. Something had shifted during Marcus's night in jail. Some realization had penetrated his desperate fixation. She wasn't naive enough to believe one night in lockup had cured his obsession, but perhaps it had cracked the fantasy he'd constructed. Her phone chimed with a text. Expecting Marcus with a new number, she was surprised to see Jamie's name. "Checking in. Hope you're okay after whatever happened last night. Coffee still on for tomorrow?" Such a simple message, but it represented everything she'd been fighting for. The right to move forward, to explore new connections, to live unburdened by the past. She typed back, "Yes, looking forward to it." As she pressed send, a strange peace settled over her. For 6 months, she'd been defined by what she'd lost. Her marriage, her home, her sense of security. But lying there in her teal-walled apartment, with its morning sunlight and exposed brick, she realized she'd gained something far more valuable. Herself. The next afternoon, as she sat across from Jamie in the office cafe, laughing at his story about a disastrous camping trip, her phone vibrated with an email notification. It was from Marcus, sent through his lawyer to hers, then forwarded to her. "I'm checking into a treatment program for alcohol dependency and anger management. I've instructed my attorney to expedite any remaining divorce matters without contest. You deserve peace. I'm sorry it took losing everything to understand that what I really lost was myself, long before I lost you. Be happy, Eliza. Truly." She closed the email without responding, returning her attention to the man across from her. This kind stranger with patient eyes who asked questions and waited for answers, who respected boundaries and offered support without demands. "Everything okay?" Jamie asked, noticing her momentary distraction. Eliza smiled, genuine and unburdened for perhaps the first time in a year. "Yes," she said, meaning it completely. "Everything is exactly as it should be." Later, as they walked back to the office together, their hands brushed accidentally. Neither pulled away. Their fingers interlaced naturally, tentatively. Not a promise of forever, but an acknowledgement of possibility. The autumn sun warmed her face as they walked, casting long shadows behind them. Eliza didn't look back at those shadows. She'd spent too long living in the dark spaces of what might have been, what should have been. Now, finally, she was stepping fully into the light of what was and what could be. On her terms, in her time, with her whole heart intact and healing. The ring Marcus had dropped into their anniversary champagne 6 months ago now sat in a small box in her dresser drawer. Not as a memento of what she'd lost, but as a reminder of what she'd found in its aftermath. The strength to leave, the courage to rebuild, and the wisdom to recognize that some endings aren't failures. They're just necessary beginnings in disguise.